Hey everybody, it's August 3rd, I think, and I don't even know whether or not I'm in frame or not on the camera because I'm walking, and I'm heading out to the field to do a little work on the Oliver. Last time I did any work on the Oliver, I reinstalled my radiator after having it record, and I used it for a little bit, and then I noticed that I had either forgot to put on the filler cap for the power steering reservoir, or I had it was loose and it fell off at some point. But more than likely what happened was I took it off during the removal of the hood and forgot to put the darn thing on there. So needless to say, that was a mistake on my part. And well, let me set up the tripod. Okay, so here's the filler right here. The reservoir is actually a small tank about that big around, about this tall. It sits right on top of the pump for the power steering. And the cap has been off of it, and it's rained several times since I noticed this. And I mean, we've had some downpours, so some water has gotten in here. Now, the good news for me is that I haven't started the tractor since I noticed the problem. So I don't think a lot of water was able to circulate into the system. Water in hydraulic systems is bad. Any way you slice it, it's just bad to have in there. Corrosion is probably one of the major factors. You can cause other problems too, but anyways. So here's what my plan's going to be for today. Before I start the tractor, what I'm going to do is I've got one of these pumps here for sucking fluids out. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pump out this reservoir. Now, water is heavier than the hydraulic fluid. So if this reservoir were perfectly clear right now, if it was a glass reservoir, and what we would see in theory is that it should be stratified. There should be an area of water sitting in the bottom, and then there should be fluid up near the top. So if I start this up, it mixes everything up. It can even cause the water to emulsify into the fluid. So I don't want to do that. So what I'm going to do is I got myself a nice clean, clear jar, and I'm going to try and pump a little bit by holding this suction hose, all the way down at the bottom. I'm going to try and pump a little bit out and see if I can see whether or not I get some water. I mean, I can't imagine why I wouldn't. You know what? When he grabbed me, what I should have brought was I meant to bring some little spring clamps, because it's going to squeeze see, if I use a spring clamp to hold one of these hoses in position, it's more than likely it's going to actually squeeze the hose down. All right, I'll figure out a way to do this. Well, it looks like that has already emulsified. The water has blended with the fluid, and that's why it looks like Pepto-Bismol. So that's disheartening. So I'm going to stop right there. So I'm not going to see what I had hoped, which was just a bunch of water in the bottom that I could just pull right out. Since it's emulsified, the correct way to fix this is actually to remove all the fluid from the whole system. I could tell just by the viscosity that that's got a lot of water in it. All right, so what you're looking at right here is this is the top of the pump. This is the bottom of the reservoir. And there are two lines that come out of the bottom of the reservoir. One of them comes right here and makes a loop around and goes into the back of the pump. That's the suction line. Okay, so the pump is sucking on this line, pulling the fluid out of the reservoir. out of the pump down here in the bottom, probably out of frame, is the high pressure line going to the system, to the steering system. It's going to go over to that steering valve. Okay, and then on the back side of the pump, coming out of the reservoir, is a line that goes down and goes back also to that steering system. And that line right there is the return line for the fluid coming back from the system that's not being used to do any work. So that line right there, basically any water or anything that was in that reservoir could easily, from gravity, just go right down that line. So what I want to do, okay, if I try and snake a pipe down this line, it's really not going to get anywhere, because it's going to get to the pump, and this is a gear style pump, and you can't pass anything through the gear style pump other than fluid when it's running, because of the way that the teeth on the gears actually work. I'm not going to get into that whole thing, how that works, but trust me, I'm not going to get a line through there. But what I want to do is I want to run a line down into the reservoir and get it into that line there, and then run it down inside that line, and then put suction on it. And what that should do is that should clear that whole side of the system. I'm not going to be able to get everything out of the system unless I completely disassemble all the lines, blow all the lines out, and then refill the system with a ton of fluid and work all the air out. Now that would be the correct way to do it, but this is going to be the quick and dirty redneck way. So this is not going to be ideal, but as much of the fluid that I can get out of the system that I can, the contaminated fluid that is, I'm going to get out. It's going to make it so that when I replace it with clean fluid, I'm going to end up with a higher volume of clean fluid, a higher ratio of clean fluid to contaminated fluid, which is just going to be better overall for the system. So, next up is going to be simply a matter of shooting down there and getting in there. Well, how am I going to do that? Well, the first thing I did was I said, well, what am I going to do for line? Well, I've got a little plastic adapter so I can get down to a smaller diameter line than what I have. So, in other words, if I take this, I should be able to plug this into my hand pump. Okay? That gets me down to a line that size. That line, I can stuff this 1/4 inch stuff, this really small stuff. I can actually stuff that in there so tight that it actually makes a pretty good connection. And I have a lot of this stuff. Okay, so if it ends up being junk after I'm done because it's all covered with fluid and trash, I don't care. I'm all right with that. I've made my peace. All right, so the next question is, how do I snake this little line, which is as flimsy as a wet piece of spaghetti? How do I feed this down into the reservoir and get it to actually go into that opening right where that hose is and get to go down the hose, as opposed to just turning around on itself and not going anywhere? And the trick I have for that, oh, and by the way, this is all theoretical. I haven't even tried this yet. I don't even know if this is going to work at all, but hey, take a chance. Anyways, what I'm going to do is I went in my junk wire pile and I found this piece of copper wire. This is actually multi-strand wire, and I took one of the strands, okay, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to string this hose onto this piece of copper wire. Now this may be too long. Let me see what we're going to do here. Well, I don't want to run the risk of it falling down inside there, so maybe I will try and actually use this whole piece. Now, any of you in the medical profession, or if for whatever other reason, have had to use a catheter, probably are quite aware of this whole process or principle of getting this flexible line to go right where you want it to go. Yeah, that's plenty long enough right there, so I'm going to actually break this wire off right here. Of course, I didn't bring any wire cutters. That wouldn't make too much sense. All right, there we go. Nice thing about copper. Bend it enough times, it fatigues and breaks easily. Okay, so now I'm going to take this little doohickey and I'm going to see if I can't get this into that hole. I'm just going by feel, tapping around. I know if I keep it angled, I'm going to be hitting the inside wall, front wall of the reservoir, and I know that once I'm down in that corner, if I keep it kind of lined up in the middle and pull back a little bit, I should be able to hit that. It ain't working, guys. I got a sneaking suspicion there may be a screen in the bottom of this thing. Well, unfortunately, I just shined my light down there, and unfortunately, in the bottom of the reservoir, the return tube actually is a curved metal tube that comes up into the reservoir. So the outlet of the tube doesn't face up, and it actually is about 1.5 inches off the bottom of the reservoir. So for whatever reason, they've got the return tube doing that. Maybe that helps keep the flow going in the in the reservoir, keeping the fluid moving around, so you don't have any spots that have stuff that could just sit there and fester. I was able to get the tube to go down, my little suction tube. I was able to get that into the other outlet. Again, all I'm going to be able to pull out of there is really the volume that's in this little U-shaped piece of pipe right here to the pump, and that's probably about it. The entire volume of what was in the reservoir anyways. Alright, I just unclamped this line that goes to the bottom of the reservoir because it's an easy one to get to, relatively speaking. Now I should be able to do what I wanted to do in the first place, which was get that hose right down in there. That's actually a pretty decent fit. Ooh. I'm actually able to create a vacuum on that. This is that tight of a fit, my adapter here. I'm going to take this, I'm going to stick it right down. No, it's not that tight of a fit. You know why it was that tight of a fit? Because of the OD of this pipe. So we go. Bring this clamp up. Now, I can create a vacuum on the system, and I wonder whether or not, if I turn the steering wheel, whether or not that'll actually open valves enough to allow it to actually draw some fluid out of other locations, even though I'm on the return line. I don't know if there's a check valve or something in the system that would stop that from happening or not. It would be great if I had an assistant here. You see, with the steering wheel in the center not being turned on this system, it's almost as if there's a series loop going on here that includes the reservoir and the pump, and part of the steering valve. And that fluid in that series loop that I'm talking about doesn't interact with the fluid in the other loop, which is the other part of the steering valve and the steering cylinder, until the steering wheel is rotated and the valve is open. The valve actually does two jobs. The steering valve, it decides which direction the flow goes in and out of the valve, and it also meters the amount of flow, so that the faster the steering wheel is turned, the faster the flow is going to be sent out to the cylinder. So without anybody up there touching the steering wheel, what I'm doing essentially right now is I'm clearing out circuit number 1. My cell phone rings and my hands are as greasy as can be.
Hello.
Oh, rate reduction. Bastards. Telemarketers. Hope they all burn in hell. Well, that's not nice, right? Yeah. You know what? Stop pushing us to our limits of patience. If I bump the starter, I could probably turn that pump a little bit. Oh, I think my battery's completely dead. All right, the day's almost over, and came back out here to work on getting the last little bit of this oil that I can get pulled out of the system out of here. So I brought an assistant with me. Mark, come on over here. This is my youngest son, Mark. He's my assistant today. He's a good boy. All right, Mark, come on over and get in the driver's seat. All right, climb your way up there, and looks like a chipmunk or something was on there. Sit on that driver's seat. Whichever way you want. Just don't hurt yourself. Now the battery's out of the tractor, so there's no danger of it accidentally being started or anything like that. So perfectly safe for him to sit up there. All right. Now, when I tell you to, you turn the wheel clockwise, like the way a clock goes. Okay? All right, go ahead.
Stop.
Yeah, go ahead. Okay, now Mark, I'm going to have you turn the other way.
Okay. Why is it harder? Why does it get harder to?
Because there's still fluid in the system. You can stop for a minute.
Daddy, have you ever cut yourself on this metal that's sticking out of the seat?
Maybe.
Now start turning.
Turn it to the clockwise again, the way you did the first time. There you go.
Why does the tires move?
Because the tractor's not running and there's no fluid in there now anyways, or not enough fluid.
What about when you started?
Well, we wouldn't want to start it now because there's no fluid in there. It's not good to run it without any fluid in there.
When does it stop? Daddy.
Well, when I don't see any more fluid coming out, then I'll know we got most of it out. Okay. Stop. I need you to do me a favor. I need you to run back to the house. I need you to get me that box of gloves. You know, the box of blue gloves. All right, so I'm satisfied that that is how much as I'm going to get out of the system with this method. So I'll reattach that suction line to the reservoir, and then reattach the suction line to the reservoir, and then tomorrow I'll come back out here with some fluid and start the process of popping this off and bleeding the air out of the system. Try to be fun. Because I'm I'm sure they're getting plenty of air in there now. When I get done.
Yep.
Yep. That's your expert opinion?
Yep. Yep.
You work on these a lot, do you?
Yep.
Okay, Mark. We have that glove you have. And we use this glove to make a temporary cap for the spout here.
What if it falls in?
Oh, it won't fall in. So I'm putting it on outside the spout. It's just going to act like a cover.
What do you think happened to the spout?
Well, I think what probably happened was I took it off to take this hood off. And when I put the hood back on, I must have had it somewhere on the tractor, meaning to, have it handy to put it back on. I forgot to put it back on, and when I drove away with my test drive, it probably fell off of wherever it was. But I looked all around on the ground over there where the tractor was parked while I was working on it, and I didn't find it anywhere over there. So it kind of bugs me because I can't figure out where it went. Okay. I can clean up most of this stuff tomorrow. So just take a look at how much we got. Ooh, look at that.
Looks like a shake.
So I don't remember exactly how much was in here when we just emptied the reservoir, but I want to say it was probably about this much. So that's quite a bit more. You can actually start to see, let me zoom in on that. I also have a habit of not facing the camera and being a distance away. I'm sure the microphone's not picking up most of what I'm saying when I'm doing that. So sorry about that. But you can actually start to see that this is separating out on the bottom here a little bit. So that white stuff on the bottom is a much higher concentration of mostly water. But the fact that this is this milky pink color means that there's a lot of, don't touch that, Mark, it's very dirty. There's a lot of bad. Actually, now that I think of it, I had some stale gas in this when I started. So that might actually be, well, no, that wouldn't be on the bottom, I don't think. Yeah. Who cares? It's bad stuff, I know that.
It looks like a shake.
Shake? Yeah, gross. Looks like a smoothie from Mc... Well, it's the next day, and battery's all charged up. So I'm going to put some fluid in the reservoir and start working on getting that air out. Now, even though this is the power steering system, the original owner's manual for the Oliver actually recommends using either 30 weight motor oil with a special Oliver additive added to it, which is probably no longer available because it's no longer 1960. Without a time machine, I don't think we're going to get that stuff. Or automatic transmission fluid. Type A, I think it said, if I remember correctly. So, did a quick Google search, type A. Turns out pretty much, seems like just about any modern regular ATF fluid, like the Dextron or Mercron 2 or 3, should be perfectly fine. Basically, it's a light hydraulic oil, and the main thing is it's got these corrosion inhibitors in it. So that's what I'm going to do. Now, ATF fluid has gotten pretty expensive. This is the cheapest stuff I could buy today at my Napa, and it was like almost $6 with the tax. So, not cheap stuff. I also have a quart of this mobile ATF D/M. The D/M means it's Dextron, Mercron compatible. So really, as long as I'm not using the there's a Ford variety that is more sticky, I think, and certain Ford transmissions over the years needed them. I think as long as I stay away from that stuff, I can probably pretty much put whatever I want in here for ATF fluid. So this I'd probably get for $1 or $2 at a flea market. This $6. This 2 quarts is probably not going to do it because I was probably low on fluid before I took all this out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to supplement that with some motor oil. A couple months back I was at the flea market and I spotted a cardboard box on the ground in this guy's booth, and he had these quarts of motor oil, and I think I ended up buying the whole case for what worked out to be like 50 cents a quart, knowing full well that this is old motor oil, because of the fact that it's in this container here, which a lot of people probably don't even remember seeing. And how, pray tell, do you get that out of there? Well, boys and girls, back in the day you had a little doohickey like this. Matter of fact, there probably are tons of these all over the... This one still got the original price sticker on it. It was 88 cents for this one, because this is a nice metal one. But anyways, it's got this sharp blade right here, and the way that works is you push this down in here and that cuts through and cuts a nice hole in the can. Well, nice being a relative term. This one even has a rubber gasket right here that helps seal it to the can. Spoiler alert, they usually don't seal very well. This is the messy old way of doing it. But I've got this oil. This oil is All Seasons motor oil, but on the top it says that it is 10W40. So actually it's starting to leak out of this container because these had gotten wet at some point. So what I think I'm going to do is, for starters, I'm going to drop in my quart of this. So I don't have the Oliver additive for this oil, but I figure that if I'm using enough of this to a ratio of that, this should act to keep that from doing something bad to the system. Alright, that's almost full by the looks of it, so that looks like that's about a 1 quart reservoir, but I know that that's going to go down as soon as I start it. I might not even start it. I might just try cranking the engine and getting that pump spinning a little bit first. So I got a nice charge on my battery, and I'm actually embarrassed to admit that yesterday, it's been so long since I used this tractor, that yesterday I actually was pushing the button down there, which is the type of button you see on a lot of old tractors to start them, to try and start it, and thinking the battery was dead, when in reality that's the preheater. So it's the key on top that I rigged up to start this thing. That's how long it's been since I drove the old Oliver. You imagine that? Totally forgot what the heck I was doing. So the battery might not have been completely dead, but I put a full charge on it anyways. It could use it. And of course, eventually I'll revisit the whole wiring and alternator deal. Alright, so I've got the battery hooked up. And get this stuff off the top just because it'll probably fall off if I leave it up there. See what I mean? Of course, I forgot to bring a rag. Alright, I just topped it off with that motor oil. There should be enough fluid in the system to start it now.
response is pretty good, so I don't think there was much air in the system after all.
I guess I'll take it for a test drive and see how it acts while I'm driving. Well, that seems fine. I'm just curious what that fluid looks like now that it's had a chance for the new fluid to mix with the old fluid. I'm scared to look. Looks like it just blew that, blew my rubber glove off there because it's, the original cap had a pinhole in it for venting. So I'm gonna have to figure something out.